Welcome to part 2 of our ongoing 2-part series on H.P. Lovecraft's Herbert West, Reanimator.
Yes.
I'm Chad Fifer.
I'm Chris Lackey.
And this is the H.P. Lovecraft Literary Podcast. We've got an interview with Stuart Gordon.
And we are having the readings done by Andrew Lehman.
And we are sponsored this week, as we were last week, by Tor.com.
Tor.com is having an awesome event, which is December Belongs to Cthulhu.
That's right. Every day they're getting new content from scholars and fans and authors on the Lovecraft mythos.
Yeah,
and,
awesome stuff.
They've got artwork up there. They've got analysis. They've got original stories.
Mm-hmm.
It's all Lovecraftly delicious. And, you know, if you want to buy any of the great books that Tor.com has,
30% off.
30% off Lovecraft-related content.
Yes.
And without further ado, we're going to jump right into the show. Here we are with part 2 of Herbert West Reanimator, featuring special guest
Stuart Gordon.
HPPodcraft.com.
And then we move on to the fourth one,
The Scream of the Dead.
which I love.
This is a good one.
Yeah.
And I think this one involves, I know it does, it involves a traveling salesman.
Yeah.
Which is Lovecraft's father's profession.
Right. This starts in July 1910, so a few years have passed, and the protagonist is actually in Illinois visiting his parents, where I'm from.
Yeah, and myself.
And myself.
Yeah.
Actually, he did have a relative of some kind that's from Illinois.
Well, his dad did travel, too,
Yeah.
to Illinois when he was doing his salesman stuff.
With something like his great-uncle founded Devlin, Illinois, which is close to Peoria. It was
I
like
did not know
a
that.
temperance town, and so Lovecraft has some biographical connection to
Illinois.
the great land of Lincoln. When he returns from Illinois, West tells him, "Hey, I've invented this new embalming compound that keeps bodies fresh." I didn't tell you I was working on it. But
Yeah,
I
it's just
invented
this
it.
little side project.
I got a body downstairs now. I waited for you. So they go down there, and the body is this stranger who West says had been on his way to transact some business at the mills.
And he wasn't feeling well
Wasn't
because
feeling
he was
well.
walking a lot, and he said that he looked really tired. So
Yeah.
he came in, and then he died. He just had a heart attack.
Right. Now, of course, in their brief conversation before he passed away, he said, "I have no family, and nobody will find out where I say to have a heart attack right now." And then he had a heart attack. So West just knows this from their brief
Just
conversation.
happens to know that. Yeah.
Come in. Do you have family? So West takes him down to the lab, and he injects a new fluid in the corpse in order to neutralize this embalming agent.
Right.
And then he does something curious. When the body starts to twitch, he puts a pillow over its face.
Uh-huh.
I didn't know you had to treat dead folks that way, but when all signs of life are completely gone, he injects the reagent, and it's a success. The body wriggles a bit, and the protagonist asks, where have you been? But the way the body responds, he doesn't like.
For that very fresh body, at last writhing into full and terrifying consciousness, with eyes dilated at the memory of its last scene on Earth, threw out its frantic hands in a life and death struggle with the air, and suddenly collapsing into a second and final dissolution from which there could be no return, screamed out the cry that will ring eternally in my aching brain. Help! Keep off, you cursed little towhead fiend! Keep that damn needle away from me!
So we find out
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
that West has killed this guy.
He just outright murdered him. Yeah, this is kind of a turn in the story because, I mean, even though his methods are unorthodox, you know, people are dead and he's trying to bring them to life. He's not necessarily a terrible guy, but at this point, he's pretty evil. Like,
Well, he wants that fresh body.
yeah,
Yeah.
And so that's the only way he can get.
resorting to murder.
Yes,
Yeah.
he's ready to kill for it. The question is, why doesn't the narrator stop working with West at this point now that West has started murdering people?
Yeah.
Yeah, how did you...
And
address that?
well, I think if this were real, and someone had developed something that could actually bring the dead back to life, this would be such a monumental discovery.
Right, absolutely.
That this is like Nobel Prize time. This is
Well, changing humanity. Like,
yes. So
the entire way people live their lives.
So I think that the way you can justify it, I suppose, is the idea that the idea that they're creating something for the greater good of mankind. That this is a
Sure.
a huge medical breakthrough.
Right. And I mean, I could also see him sort of looking the other way with this too. Like, maybe I misheard what the body said. Like maybe with the zombie guy. Like he's kind of all this. I mean, he's put a lot of time and effort. I mean,
Sure.
years into this research with West.
No, but I think that he knows, and I think that that's in a way what Lovecraft's getting at with this guy is that this narrator is really he's changing.
Yeah.
He is becoming tainted by his association with West, and he is in a sense even more evil than West because he's keeping quiet about it.
Because he's complacent.
Yeah.
You're right. And also Lovecraft has a long history by this point of writing characters who are easily influenced or who maybe have a bit of a weak nature,
right,
and can kind of be led along in certain things.
But I also think it's true, and it's interesting that people in this world will go along with someone who seems to have the answers.
You're right.
You see that over and over again. People like Jim Jones, or where they're ready to do whatever this guy says because here's a guy who really seems like
he knows what he's doing.
He's got a plan.
Yeah.
And in fact, isn't there some kind of psychology test they do where an authority figure makes you shock a person?
Oh, yeah, I've read about that. There's a really cool book called Elephants on LSD, and it's just a book of all these crazy experiments people have done over the last 100 years, and one of them is how a person in a lab coat will come in and tell a person to push a button, and then they push the button and you hear somebody scream in the other room, and that the people, like women would typically do it, guys would stop, but women would always just do it. Either they would be crying like while they do it, and they would push the button while hearing the guy scream, and then finally, like, the guy would scream louder and louder each time they pushed it until finally he didn't scream anymore.
Right.
And
They would also tell you in that experiment to turn up the ampage each time.
Yeah.
So that you know that you're giving them greater and greater shocks.
Yeah.
But I think it's also the idea that West is a charismatic figure.
Yeah.
West is he's got this plan. He has got and he's a genius. And and his stuff is working. And for our narrator to just run the other way,
Very good point.
Yeah, it's true.
Moving on, we're in Chapter 5.
The Horror from the Shadows.
In 1915, West and the protagonist, they join up with a Canadian regiment in Belgium, in Flanders, jumping into the war before the U.S.
Right.
The U.S. wasn't in war yet, but West is very motivated,
right,
because there's lots of fresh bodies,
right,
and in a sort of departure from his previous researches, lots of pieces of bodies.
He had wild and original ideas on the independent vital properties of organic cells and nerve tissue separated from natural physiological systems, and achieved some hideous preliminary results in the form of never-dying, artificially nourished tissue obtained from the nearly hatched eggs of an indescribable tropical reptile. 2 biological points he was exceedingly anxious to settle. First, whether any amount of consciousness and rational action be possible without the brain, proceeding from the spinal cord and various nerve centers. And second, whether any kind of ethereal, intangible relation distinct from the material cells may exist to link the surgically separated parts of what has previously been a single living organism.
So he's changing his research. I mean, he's going from trying to bring back one person to just reanimating any kind of tissue, be it arms, legs, and he's combining them with the reptiles.
Well, what's interesting also is that there is, I'm trying to remember what the name of it is, but there are these, I think they were taken from a woman, a tumor that she had. This was back in the 50s, I think it was, that they have been able to keep these cells reproducing, and they are used in experiments all the time now. So again, I think, it might have even been earlier than the 50s, possible that Lovecraft was aware of this kind of stuff. The idea that, in a sense, this... these tumorous cells that reproduce at its rapid rate, it's almost a kind of immortality. This woman who was killed probably by her cancer,
right?
But in a sense, her cells are continuing to reproduce, and they use those in experiments, kind of trying to find a cure for cancer, I believe.
Right.
I happened to watch a show that was on television a couple of years ago that was about scientists, and it was essentially sort of like mad scientists, but real scientists who were doing these weird experiments. And one of them was this guy who was trying to keep the brain alive after it was removed from the body. That was one of, sort of like Donovan's brain or something. Then he realized that if you keep a brain alive, how do you know that the brain is really conscious?
Yeah.
So what he decided was you have to not just keep the brain alive, but keep the entire head alive. So he was beheading baboons and keeping the baboons' heads alive, by running some sort of blood.
Well, there's a similar test that's in that same book, that Elephants on LSD, where this Russian scientist in the 50s was taking dogs' and heads and sewing them onto other dogs.
Yeah, that's right. That was famous. But this scientist, though, reminded me a great deal of Herbert West, because what he said was that after he had decapitated a baboon and brought kept it alive, that the baboon was looking around, and one of his assistants went over to the baboon and put her finger in the baboon's mouth, and the baboon bit off her finger.
Whoa!
And the scientist was saying, what sort of an idiot puts their finger in a baboon's mouth? Which sounded so much like Herbert West. It was
overlooks the whole fact that
there's this poor woman who's missing her finger.
Right.
But
she got hurt, and then he created the weirdest circumstance. That's
and the
so
blames
great.
her for it. Yeah. Wow.
So I think Lovecraft must have known some scientists. He's capturing these kind of sort of single-minded.
Oh my god.
These guys are only thinking about the experiment.
West is keeping this vat of sort of reptile parts.
Goop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's how he keeps the severed pieces alive. He throws them in there, and then the goop, treats it or rejuvenates it. And he's got his own private library in a field hospital behind the lines in Belgium. Which he got this because he told the people in the field hospital that he was coming up with serums to help people who had been maimed seriously.
Right. Uh-huh.
And one night they get a new specimen, Major Sir Eric Moreland Clapham Lee. This guy's a great surgeon, and he's actually even studied reanimation under Dr. West.
Yes.
In fact, he's the one who helped West get this commission. Now, the protagonist doesn't know much about that, so it's just sort of mentioned.
Yeah.
But clearly there's been some past relationship between West and Lee. And Lee had been on his way to the battlefield, but his plane was shot down directly over it. And the other passenger, Lieutenant Ronald Hill, died in this crash. Ronald was torn apart. Lee was killed as well, but in pretty stable condition, except that his head was mostly decapitated.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, he's not stable condition. I mean, he's dead.
I guess,
He's dead.
Yeah,
His dead, but his body's
mostly
intact, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
That's not really stable if your head's off. So West, of course, drops the head in the vat of reptile tissue.
Yeah.
Keep it going. And then he sews everything up on the neck of the body. And then he injects the body with the reagent. It kind of starts twitching around, throwing its arms out, as if in memory of that plane crash.
Yeah, of the plane crashing.
What followed I shall never positively know, but may have been wholly an hallucination from the shock caused at that instant by the sudden and complete destruction of the building in a cataclysm of German shell fire. The body on the table had risen with a blind and terrible groping, and we had heard a sound. I should not call that sound a voice, for it was too awful. And yet its timbre was not the most awful thing about it. Neither was its message. It had merely screamed, "Jump, Ronald, for God's sake, jump!" The awful thing was its source, for it had come from the large covered vat in that ghoulish corner of crawling black shadows.
So the head in the box of Lee. Remember, yelling to his pilot.
And the head and the body are somehow still working together.
Yeah.
Right. He injected the body, but then it woke the head up.
Yeah, and the body's moving, kind of along with the with this dialogue. We used this idea in the movie to good effect.
Yeah, exactly.
Although we ended up naming him after Hill, instead of after Lee.
Yeah.
God knows why we did that. And later on, this character of Lee, I guess in the next story, he shows up again.
Yes, he does.
He does show up again.
Which is
He does show up.
crazy.
Well, I mean, what happens though, right? Is that right at the end of this part? A plane or there's a big explosion.
Yeah, there's some shell fire, which Lovecraft loves the cleansing bolt of lightning.
Exactly.
Here he did it with German shell
It's
fire.
it's not actually a bolt of lightning, but it is a big explosion, and then they don't know what happens. They can't find the body or the head.
Exactly. They managed to escape, but where the body of the officer?
They assume that it was just destroyed in the explosion.
Yeah.
But
No.
part 6.
Yeah, we're on to the next chapter, which has a title that's maybe less pulp than earlier, but has more of that sweet Lovecraft flavor. It's called
The Tomb Legions. When Dr. Herbert West disappeared a year ago, the Boston police questioned me closely. They suspected that I was holding something back, and perhaps suspected graver things. But I could not tell them the truth, because they would not have believed it.
And the truth is that a lot of Herbert's failed experiments are still out there.
Oh yeah, they're out and about. And this is the last chapter of this of the whole Herbert West thing. So the narrator's kind of wrapping things up. He's saying something happened, and I'm going to tell you the end. The end of this.
Yeah, there's that nice. Right from the beginning, he said, "Look, Herbert disappeared." You get the sense of what the final thing is going to be, which is which tells you that it was serialized, but clearly Lovecraft knew where he wanted this to end up throughout the whole writing of it. And so there was that thing from the initial incident that was digging at its own grave that ran away.
Dr. Halsey.
There was Dr. Halsey, who's still in the asylum.
Who escaped from the asylum.
Right.
Well, we find out in this chapter
soon. In the passage when he says Dr. Halsey's still in the asylum too, he said he's in there for doing cannibal things. Such a funny way to describe it. What are the cannibal things? Are eating human flesh. What other cannibal things are there?
What other cannibal things are there?
You know. He was out watching cannibal movies. Hanging out with his cannibal friends at the cannibal alley.
Right, in his cannibal journal.
And we don't know who else is lurking about that Herbert's lost track of.
Right.
Although the thing that he's perhaps most afraid of is that Lee is stalking about Headless, and with the knowledge to reanimate dead things as well.
Right.
He's created a Headless nemesis. So in this chapter, we flash forward after the war. Herbert is now living in a beautiful house in Boston, which overlooks an old burying ground. He's got a huge cellar laboratory with a large incinerator. And when the workmen were digging it out, they actually knocked out an underground passage into the cemetery. Some kind of secret passage beneath the tombs, which would seem to be something that Herbert would be interested in, but he has it plastered over.
Right.
The end of Herbert West began one evening in our joint study when he was dividing his curious glance between the newspaper and me. A strange headline item had struck at him from the crumpled pages, and a nameless Titan claw had seemed to reach down through 16 years. Something fearsome and incredible had happened at Sefton Asylum, 50 miles away, stunning the neighborhood and baffling the police. In the small hours of the morning, a body of silent men had entered the grounds, and their leader had aroused the attendants. He was a menacing military figure who talked without moving his lips, and whose voice seemed almost ventriloquially connected with an immense black case he carried. His expressionless face was handsome to the point of radiant beauty, but had shocked the superintendent when the hall light fell on it. For it was a wax face with eyes of painted glass. A larger man guided his steps, a repellent hulk whose bluish face seemed half eaten away by some unknown malady. The speaker had asked for the custody of the cannibal monster committed from Arkham 16 years before, and upon being refused, gave a signal which precipitated a shocking riot. The fiends had beaten, trampled, and bitten every attendant who did not flee, killing 4, and finally succeeding in the liberation of the monster. Those victims who could recall the event without hysteria swore that the creatures had acted less like men than like unthinkable automata, guided by the wax-faced leader. By the time help could be summoned, every trace of the men and of their mad charge had vanished.
So, Flippin' Lee went and made a plastic head so he could look like a person, and he's went to collect Dr. Halsey.
You think he made the plastic head?
I don't know if he made it or bought it or whatever. From a wax museum or something.
Could be, yeah.
Boy, I'd love it if he bought it. I would wish that was in the story.
How did that happen?
In our movie, we made it an anatomical bust that he was wearing.
That was, I'm very familiar with the movie, and when I sat down to read this recently, I think I only read the first 3 chapters of it, because I didn't remember, I thought that this was stuff that you came up with for the whole having a fake head, and then when I was rereading it, I'm like, oh my god, this is totally from the story.
Yeah. No, it's Lovecraft.
Yeah, that's amazing, and it's really creepy. Like it seems like it has really a very creepy. Modern sensibility to it.
Oh yeah, no, that's the thing is that these were, when I read these stories, I thought these are incredibly cinematic. There's so much action in them. People always are sort of down on Lovecraft because some of his stuff is very internalized. This is the opposite. This is just action-packed.
Yeah.
And fun-filled.
Yeah, it really is.
And it's like, and the fact that Lovecraft always was saying disparaging things about these stories, it strikes me as kind of odd.
Yeah.
Because I think this is some of his best writing, really.
I flew through this, as some of his stuff is a little harder to read. This is, of course, another one of the stories that is easily digestible.
But he was having fun with this.
Yeah, he was. You can tell. And he's a pretty funny guy.
Yeah, there's some stuff that he's written that's pretty funny.
I would never have thought of him that way until we did another show where we looked at a short story that he wrote that was a comedy. And it was really funny.
It was actually funny.
Yeah. I think that he knows where to put a joke. This is not a joke, though. West reads this article in the paper and
flips out.
Yeah, he just kind of sits there. In fact, it says he sits there with his mouth open until midnight. I don't know what that's but the doorbell rings.
Which can't be good.
No, the protagonist answers it. No, it's not good when the doorbell rings at midnight. I hope all the monsters were outside watching their
Watching their clock, just waiting.
No, not right.
Not yet. 5 more minutes.
So the protagonist answers it, and a group of strange figures drop off this large square box. One of them grunts, "Express, prepaid." And then they walk, which is great detail. And then they walk out into the night, and he says it looks like they were turning toward the cemetery. Strange. So West comes down, he looks at the box, and it says from Eric Moreland, Clapham, Lee.
Yep.
West knows what's up.
He knows.
He says it's the finish.
This is it. I'm gonna die.
But let's incinerate this.
Doesn't this sound like the end of the movie Seven?
Yeah.
Oh right.
I thought that too. What's in the box?
What's in the box? What's the box? But he just burns it. He just goes, quick, just burn the box.
Yeah, he's ready for it, and
Right.
they burn it, but it makes no sound when
No.
it goes. But then the plaster begins to fall off the wall where the secret passage has been covered to the tombs, and he begins to see the blackness within.
Just then, the electric lights went out, and I saw, outlined against some phosphorescence of the netherworld, a horde of silent, toiling things which only insanity, or worse, could create. Their outlines were human, semi-human, fractionally human, and not human at all. The horde was grotesquely heterogeneous. They were removing the stones quietly, one by one, from the centuried wall. And then, as the breach became large enough, they came out into the laboratory in single file, led by a stalking thing with a beautiful head made of wax. A sort of mad-eyed monstrosity behind the leader seized on Herbert West. West did not resist or utter a sound. Then they all sprang at him and tore him to pieces before my eyes, bearing the fragments away into that subterranean vault of fabulous abominations. West's head was carried off by the wax-headed leader, who wore a Canadian officer's uniform. As it disappeared, I saw that the blue eyes behind the spectacles were hideously blazing with their first touch of frantic, visible emotion. Servants found me unconscious in the morning. West was gone. The incinerator contained only unidentifiable ashes. Detectives have questioned me, but what can I say? The Sefton tragedy they will not connect with West. Not that, nor the men with the box, whose existence they deny. I told them of the vault, and they pointed to the unbroken plaster wall and laughed. So I told them no more. They imply that I am a madman or a murderer. Probably I am mad. But I might not be mad if those accursed tomb legions had not been so silent.
And that's the end of the
Which is
story.
really creepy. That they quietly take the bricks out. They're just very methodical.
And Herbert doesn't even scream.
He doesn't even scream.
The silence of that whole scene is actually very eerie.
That's pretty cool. And it's kind of strange that Lee decides to give him the box, which I assume has the head in there because we don't see Lee's head again. So,
Right.
Did Lee have a plan that Herbert was going to open it up and then see the head there, and then we're going to have a conversation or something?
I don't think his head was in the box.
I don't think so either.
No, I think that was a decoy kind of.
Yeah. Get him downstairs.
Oh, get him downstairs to go to the incinerator.
Incinerate it, yeah.
All right.
I thought at first maybe that the plan was to open the box and then he'd go, "All right, guys, I'm in a basement.
Yeah.
This is how you get in there." But no, yeah, I think it was
It was
trick.
just a trick to get him down to the cellar.
Yeah.
But and that's the end of Herbert West Reanimator.
That's the end of Herbert West.
Now, in your movie, it pretty much ends.
Well, we had the character we have torn to pieces is actually Halsey in our movie.
Right.
And it's similar. The reanimated corpses. The idea of this sort of legion of corpses.
Mm-hmm.
We have that idea as well. With Hill leading them. To use them as his slaves to.
Yeah.
Right.
I love
Like
that.
his army.
To destroy West. So that idea we also borrowed as well. It's funny rereading this now, seeing the various elements and even some of the dialogue. Like there's a line about I'm either mad or a murderer.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
I think we use a line exactly like that when Hill is trying to sort of blackmail West, and he says, people will either think that you're a madman or a murderer. You have your choice.
Oh, right. Uh-huh.
And so the story is sort of woven through the movie. It's funny. I mean, the element that's not in these stories that we made a lot of use of is a woman character. Which is something you almost never find in Lovecraft.
Yeah,
Right.
pretty rare if there's anything. I mean, it was only in
The Thing on the Doorstep.
The Thing on the Doorstep, we talk about a woman character, and
Yeah,
she's only
and it turns
sort
out,
of a woman.
It turns out she's not a woman at all.
Yeah,
Right,
exactly.
There are no women in Lovecraft, which is really strange. And then when you're making a movie, it's always, well, where's the girl? There's got to be a girl,
Sure.
damsel in distress somewhere.
Yeah.
So we invented the dean's daughter, and had a relationship between her and this unnamed narrator.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that's a good idea, making her Halsey's daughter too, because that ties in, her father with all the bad stuff that's going on. So there's a whole other level for her, like a sense of.
Yeah, and Hill has that creepy lust for her as well.
Oh right, yes, that's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
Extremely creepy.
But there was a lot of sort of streamlining, like, taking the first story where the creature in Lovecraft's version just breaks out.
Mm-hmm.
We have our creature breaking out of the morgue, sort of the refrigerator section, breaking the door down on top of Halsey.
Oh right, yeah.
And killing Halsey.
Right.
So it's, instead of Halsey dying of a plague, Halsey is killed by the first creature. So we're just sort of tying the two stories
Yeah,
together.
I mean, to have a whole other story about a play going on and they're doing that stuff, it seems pretty unnecessary for a movie.
And it was also kind of compressing the time. I mean, the thing that, about the Lovecraft stories, it takes 17 years for all of this to happen. So we were having it all happen within a few days.
So did you guys like the story?
Oh, yeah. I don't know.
Yeah.
I love this story.
It's
I think
great.
it's one of my favorites. I love it. I mean, and I know he hated it, or said he hated it, but it just seems so fun. Like, it's just like a fun story.
Well, the thing that made me happy was that after our movie came out, that they reprinted the story.
Oh, nice.
That the story came back. And, when I was a kid, I always used to go see Roger Corman's Poe movies.
Sure, yeah.
And those are what made me start reading Poe.
Yeah.
And the fact that the movies that I make about Lovecraft inspire people to read Lovecraft,
Yeah, absolutely.
I always think is a great thing.
That's
It
pretty
is.
amazing.
It's a great thing.
I gotta say, thanks for making this movie. This has been one of my all-time favorites, even
Well,
as
thanks.
a kid. Yeah, I've always loved it. It's great. So, good job.
Well, thank you.
Now, you mentioned Poe. You and Jeffrey Combs are working on a show.
Yeah, we're
or
doing.
not working on. It's running.
Yeah, we're doing Jeffrey's doing a one-man show playing Edgar Allan Poe, which was put together from Poe's notes and essays and so forth.
And this isn't the first time that Jeffrey Combs has done Poe.
No, we did an episode of the Masters of Horror, an adaptation of the Black Cat, where we turned the nameless narrator into Edgar Allan Poe.
And it's if anybody's in LA, I highly recommend going to see this show because it's great. Chad and I have both seen it.
Yeah, we mentioned it a while ago.
When
In
we
the
went and saw
Tomb,
it.
I think we mentioned it.
One of the first stories. Yeah.
Well, thank you. We're hoping to tour it, so maybe we'll be able to bring
Yeah,
it down.
maybe it'll be coming to a neighborhood near you. Most recently, you came out with a movie called Stuck,
Right.
which has Mina Suvari in it and is about a terrible night in a man's life.
Yeah, it's a true story about a woman who hits a homeless man, and he goes through the windshield of her car, and instead of taking him to the emergency room, she puts him in her garage. This actually happened a few years ago.
And she thought he was dead at first because she was like drunk or something, and then when she got up in the morning, he was still stuck and alive.
I don't think she ever thought that he was dead. I think she hoped that he would die overnight,
Yeah.
and that when she came back to see him the next morning, he was begging her to take him to a hospital.
Yeah.
Well, it's an excellent movie.
Yeah, it's a really cool movie.
So I would encourage everybody to buy it.
Is there anything on the horizon we should be looking out for besides the Edgar Allan Poe?
Well, I'm working on a couple of things. One of them being a Lovecraft adaptation.
Yay!
But I think it's great that you guys are doing this show. It's,
thank you very much. We also think it's great.
Well, we've been happy that some people tripped onto it not because they were Lovecraft fans, but because it was recommended, and now they're reading Lovecraft. So it's the same kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's a happy feeling.
But yeah, it's good. It's good.
And I should also say that the three of us are working on something together, which is
We are.
That's
Yes.
true.
There is a horror film called Solitude that we are shopping around right now.
That's right. So if anybody has a couple $1,000,000 they want to contribute,
we'll be happy to take
we'll
your
be
money.
happy to take it off your hands and make this film.
Well, Stuart, again, thank you so much for joining us on our podcast and being our guest host. I'm Chris Lackey.
I'm Chad Fifer,
And I'm Stuart Gordon.
and this is the HP Lovecraft Literary Podcast.
HPPodcraft.com.
HPPodcraft.com.
And that concludes the second part of our ongoing two-part series on H.P. Lovecraft's Herbert West Reanimator.
That, you know what? I said it was a journey last week. This week, it was an epic journey.
It was an epic journey.
Wow.
You know, I really want to thank Stuart again for inviting us into his office, doing the podcast with us, and giving us so many great insights into the
That
story.
was so much fun, and he's such a cool guy.
Yeah.
Kudos.
Once again, Andrew, thanks for your great voice. Thanks for the great readings.
Andrew, we can't thank you enough.
And this week, well, something new captured my heart, and that would be Tor.com.
Tor.com.
They just crawled their way in there and went to sleep. You know, I think earlier we said over at Tor.com, these they've got so many great analysis and insights into Lovecraft's work, a lot of which we've covered on this show.
Yeah.
But whereas we've done a half-assed job,
They've done a full-ass job.
they came in with a full ass.
Yeah, they really did.
So
So get over there, look at
Get
that
over there.
stuff, and
Check it
you'll
out.
be a little bit better of a Lovecraftian amateur. when you're done.
maybe a better human being.
I think so.
Chris, what are we covering next week?
Next week we are venturing into Hypnos.
Wow, I haven't read Hypnos.
I've never read Hypnos.
I imagine it's going to hypnotize me.
Okay.
Yeah.
I bet
Well,
you-
that's gonna be that's our show for that'll be our New Year's Eve show.
Yeah, we'll be.
Yeah. So bring your kazoos and your party hats and your
Absolutely.
confetti.
And lots of confetti.
Yeah.
I'm Chris Lackey.
I'm Chad Fifer.
And this has been the HP Lovecraft Literary Podcast.
HPPodcraft.com.
HPPodcraft.com.